actually am a member of the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee. What I think you wanted to hear from me was a little bit about how the EU works, and particularly how it works in relation to women, and what the EU has done and intends to do on behalf of women's rights. The European Parliament Women's Committee certainly is very active, and we've been active in very significant legislation. A few years ago, a piece of legislation went through the European Parliament about equal rights between men and women at the workplace, which dealt with things like maternity and paternity leave, access to training, and work-life balance and other issues to do with the workplace, which was very important and a significant piece of legislation which obviously has an impact throughout Europe. And also, the other thing that the EU allows us to do is to make comparisons between what happens in individual member states. On equal pay, which is something that the Women's Committee has had quite a lot to do with, we come out actually pretty near the bottom. After the table of the 27 member states, we're around about 19-20, which really is not good enough. And when you talk to government ministers about this, they say, oh, we calculate it differently from everyone else. Well, you know, I mean, it's quite an interesting excuse, that one. In terms of women in the European Parliament, I gather that you've all been given one of these. And I'm glad you've got this, because this took me and my office a huge amount of work to produce. And I think it's the first directory of women representatives that has been produced anywhere in the world. In terms of women's representation, the European Parliament actually is a lot better than certainly the House of Commons. I mean, actually the UK is very bad on this. We look at league tables of women in national parliaments, we are pretty near the bottom, which is actually quite disgraceful. We've got just over 19% women in the House of Commons, whereas in the European Parliament it's 31%. There's 78 MEPs across the UK and Northern Ireland. The Labour Party's got 19, 8 of whom are women. The Conservatives are very low down at the moment. Not surprisingly, the Nordic countries do best in terms of representation. In fact, Sweden has got 51%. I mean, they have actually managed to have half of their representatives in the European Parliament as women. So it can be done. If you're seriously lobbying on anything, it is very important to get in at the beginning of the legislative process, because as things go through committee and are discussed, that's when changes can be made, and that's when you can get what you want. By the time it comes to the full Parliament, it's generally too late. Lobbying does actually work. I mean, because we are just a legislature, we don't obviously have a government. I mean, we're much more in this sense like the American system, where, as we keep being told, Washington is full of lobbyists. Actually, Brussels is also full of lobbyists, because what goes through the Parliament actually does matter, and we actually make the final decision on the legislation. There isn't pressure of the government or anything else to make it not happen or decide it wants something else. And that is why in the last few years there's been an absolutely huge increase in the number of lobbyists that there are, because they actually do see that they need to do it, and it's important to them. So again, you know, it really does work. So having said all of that, I really again congratulate you on the initiative, and thank you very much for inviting me back to talk to you.